They bought a forgotten patch of land for next to nothing, but what they found in a dusty old shed would change their lives forever. John and Emily had always dreamed of finding a place they could call their own, somewhere away from the hustle and bustle of the city. They were not rich, far from it, but they had saved enough to make a small investment, hoping it could grow into something bigger over time. Weekends were often spent browsing property listings, walking through neighborhoods, and imagining what life could be like if they found the perfect spot. One chilly Saturday morning, while driving through a winding country road, surrounded by trees turning gold and orange with autumn, they noticed a small for sale sign, partially hidden behind tall grass. Curious, they pulled over. The land looked almost invisible from the road, overgrown with weeds and bushes, and in the corner, a tiny shed leaned slightly to one side as if it had been forgotten for decades. The property seemed abandoned. The fence was rusty, broken in some places, and the gate barely hung on its hinges. It was not attractive by any modern standard. In fact, most people would have passed by without giving it a second thought, but the price on the sign caught their attention immediately. It was so low that it seemed unreal. John and Emily exchanged a look, both knowing that such a deal was rare, almost too good to be true. Their hearts raced with the thrill of possibility. Maybe, they thought, this was the chance they had been waiting for, the kind of opportunity that comes only once in a lifetime. As they stepped onto the land, the crunch of dried leaves under their feet seemed to echo in the quiet surroundings. The air smelled faintly of earth and old wood. The shed was small, maybe just large enough for one person to move around comfortably. Its paint had long since peeled, and the wooden panels were weathered, some splintered. Yet something about the place called to them. Perhaps it was the sense of mystery, the way it seemed frozen in time, untouched and waiting. Emily brushed away some of the overgrown vines and pushed the door open. The hinges creaked loudly, making them both jump. A cloud of dust floated into the sunlight, streaming through the cracks. Inside, the shed smelled of dampness and age. Broken tools leaned against the walls, and old crates were stacked haphazardly in corners. A thick layer of dust covered everything, showing that no one had entered for years. John carefully stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room for anything of interest. There was nothing immediately valuable in sight, just the remnants of someone's life long forgotten. But the way the shed felt that quiet, heavy, secretive air made their imagination run wild. What had this place once been used for? Why had no one bothered to clean it up or take the things inside? The locals they spoke to later had warned them about the property. Some said it was worthless. Others whispered stories about it being cursed or haunted. People don't go there for a reason, one neighbor had said, shaking his head. But those warnings only made John and Emily more determined. They were not superstitious, and besides, they were young, full of energy, excited by the idea of turning something forgotten into something valuable. Buying cheap abandoned land could be risky, but it also promised adventure. And the couple loved the thought of adventure as they explored the perimeter of the land. They noticed small details that made them curious. Part of the fence had collapsed, revealing a narrow path behind the shed, almost hidden by weeds. A large oak tree stood nearby, its roots thick and twisting, creating small hollows in the ground that seemed to invite exploration. Emily pointed to one of the crates leaning against the wall. "Maybe there's something inside," she said, half joking, half hoping. John laughed, brushing dust off his jeans, and suggested they take a closer look. With gloves on and cautious excitement, they moved the boxes and crates. Most of them were empty or filled with old, worthless items, broken tools, pieces of rusted metal, and scraps of wood. Yet, the thrill of the hunt made each discovery exciting, as if the shed itself was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Hours passed as they explored every corner. The sunlight began to fade, casting long shadows over the land and making the shed look even older and more mysterious. They took mental notes, imagining what could be done with the property, clearing the weeds, repairing the shed, maybe even building a small cabin or garden. The possibilities seemed endless, and despite the property's current state, the couple felt a connection to it, as if it had chosen them rather than the other way around. They laughed and joked about how they might find hidden treasure inside the shed. Not seriously expecting anything valuable, but enjoying the fantasy all the same. By the end of the day, John and Emily had made up their minds. They returned to the city with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. The land was cheap, abandoned, and seemingly worthless to everyone else. But to them, it represented hope and opportunity. They imagined coming back with tools, clearing the land, making it their own. Even the shed, old and decaying as it was, seemed like a secret waiting to be revealed. The couple could not stop talking about it on the way home, replaying every detail in their minds, wondering what might lie hidden behind the dusty crates and wooden panels. That day, as they drove back through the quiet country roads, they felt a strange mix of anticipation and wonder. They had purchased more than just land. They had stumbled upon a story waiting to unfold, a mystery that promised excitement, change, and perhaps even life-changing discoveries by the time they signed the papers. The couple was practically buzzing with energy. Their friends and family were skeptical, warning them that abandoned land was a gamble and that they might regret it. But John and Emily felt confident. Something about that small, forgotten shed with its creaking hinges and layers of dust had sparked an undeniable sense of possibility. Little did they know that the shed held secrets far beyond their wildest imagination's secrets that would soon turn their bargain. Purchase into an adventure they could never have dreamed of. John and Emily could hardly wait for the weekend to come. Ever since they had signed the papers for the abandoned land, their minds had been filled with curiosity and excitement. They spent the week imagining what could be inside the old shed, joking about hidden treasures or secret passages. By Saturday morning, they were ready with gloves, flashlights, and a few basic tools, eager to explore every corner of their new property. The sky was clear, and the sun cast long shadows over the overgrown grass as they walked through the gate, the hinges groaning like an old warning. Despite the warnings of locals, the couple felt only a mix of excitement and adventure, convinced that this little adventure could turn into something extraordinary as they approached the shed. The details of its decay became more noticeable. The wood panels were warped and cracked, and the roof sagged slightly in the middle. The door, held together by rusty hinges, was difficult to push open. But a little force made it creak loudly, echoing across the empty field. Dust floated in the sunlight as they stepped inside, making them sneeze and laugh at the thick cloud that had been undisturbed for years. Inside, the shed was darker than they had remembered, and shadows created strange shapes along the walls. Boxes and old furniture were scattered around, and the smell of old wood mixed with dust filled the air. It was quiet except for the occasional drip of water from a leak in the roof, a sound that seemed almost alive in the silence. They began methodically examining the shed. Emily moved some of the smaller crates aside, revealing a corner that looked unusually solid compared to the rest of the walls. John noticed that some of the floorboards around that area were slightly raised, and the wood felt thicker when he tapped it. The couple exchanged glances, a shared sense of curiosity shining in their eyes. Could there be something hidden beneath those boards? Emily knelt down, brushing aside dirt and cobwebs, while John carefully used a crowbar to lift one of the boards. Beneath it was a small, reinforced wooden box, heavy and locked. Their hearts raced. It was unlike anything they had imagined, and yet it seemed so real. Right in front of them, after months of dreaming about this moment, John and Emily carefully carried the box to a safer spot. Inside the shed, their hands trembling with a mix of excitement and nervousness, they examined the lock, which had rusted but still seemed secure. Emily ran her fingers along the edges, imagining what could be inside. Maybe old coins or jewelry, she whispered, trying to sound calm but unable to hide her excitement. John laughed softly, though he was equally curious. They tried several ways to open it, using small tools to pick at the rusted lock, all the while keeping their minds open to the possibilities. Every failed attempt made them more determined, and the air between them was filled with a thrilling tension. The shed, once ordinary and forgotten, suddenly felt like the setting of a mystery waiting to be solved. After several attempts, the lock finally gave way with a loud click that echoed in the shed like a shout. Emily held her breath as John lifted the lid and a cloud of dust rose into the air. Inside, the box was lined with old velvet, and to their amazement they found stacks of neatly arranged bundles, There were coins, old banknotes, and several small items wrapped carefully in cloth. Their eyes widened as they realized the scale of what they had discovered. The bundles were old, some of the notes faded with age, and the coins had an unmistakable shine despite the dust. It was as if time had paused inside that box, preserving a secret for decades. Waiting for someone to finally uncover it, neither of them spoke for a moment, just staring at the contents, letting the reality sink in. Emily touched one of the coins, feeling the cold metal against her fingers. This could be valuable," she said, her voice trembling slightly. John nodded, his mind racing with questions. Who had left this here? Why had it been forgotten for so long? And most importantly, how much was it really worth? The couple could barely contain their excitement, realizing that what they had found was no ordinary collection of old items. It was something special, something potentially life-changing. Deciding to be careful, they covered the box and removed some of the dust and debris around it to make room for further exploration. They began carefully looking through the shed for any clues about the origin of the box. There were scraps of paper with faded handwriting, old newspapers, and even a few personal belongings that hinted at someone's life long ago. Every detail fascinated them, turning what had seemed like a simple exploration into a hunt for answers. Emily found a small, leather-bound notebook tucked into one of the crates. Its pages were brittle, filled with notes and sketches that hinted at the careful planning of whoever had hidden the treasure. The couple realized that this was not a random stash, but something deliberately concealed, meant to be found only by someone who looked closely enough. Hours passed as they carefully explored every inch of the shed. They moved boxes, inspected corners, and even checked beneath the floorboards again. The sense of discovery kept their energy high, and laughter and whispered excitement filled the air. Each small finding, a coin, a piece of jewelry, an old photograph, added to the mystery and made them feel like detectives uncovering a long-lost story. Even the most mundane items seemed significant now, as if each one was a clue in the puzzle of the shed's history. As the day wore on and the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, John and Emily stepped back and looked at the shed. It no longer felt abandoned or empty. It felt alive, with history and secrets, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for someone to finally understand the story within. They carefully moved the box to a more secure spot in the shed, planning to contact an expert the next day to understand exactly what they had found. Excitement mixed with a careful caution because, while they knew the contents were valuable, they also understood the importance of handling the discovery responsibly. Leaving the shed that evening, they locked the door as best as they could and walked back across the overgrown land, hearts racing with anticipation. Their minds were full of questions, possibilities, and dreams of what this discovery might mean for their future. The abandoned land, which had seemed ordinary and even unappealing at first, had revealed itself as a place of wonder, mystery, and untold secrets. For John and Emily, the weekend exploration had become the beginning of an adventure that promised to change their lives in ways they had never imagined. All starting with a simple, dusty shed that had waited patiently for the right people to find its hidden treasure. The next morning, John and Emily woke up early, still buzzing with excitement from the previous day. Neither of them could sleep properly, their minds racing with the thought of the mysterious box in the shed. Over breakfast, they talked endlessly about what the contents could be worth. Coins, banknotes, and wrapped items, they had no idea how much money, history, or value the items truly held. Even though they had uncovered the box and peeked inside, they both knew they needed an expert to confirm its worth and origin. They agreed that discretion was key. They didn't want news to spread too quickly, and they certainly didn't want to risk someone trying to claim the treasure before they understood it by mid-morning. They drove into town to find an appraiser specializing in antiques and rare collectibles. The town was small and quiet, with narrow streets and low brick buildings that looked like they had stood for decades. They found a modest shop tucked between a bakery and a hardware store, its windows filled with old clocks, jewelry, and strange artifacts. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and a middle-aged man with a kind, knowing expression greeted them. After explaining their discovery carefully, he agreed to visit the shed to inspect the items. The couple was careful not to reveal too much to anyone else in town. Knowing that a story like theirs could quickly attract attention, back at the shed, John and Emily cleared a little space to display the items properly. The sun poured through the cracks in the walls, illuminating the dusty boxes and their contents. The appraiser arrived an hour later, carrying a magnifying glass, gloves, and a notebook. His eyes widened as John opened the box and displayed the carefully wrapped bundles. "This is unusual," he said softly, examining a stack of old banknotes. He turned the pages of Emily's leather-bound notebook and nodded, noting the sketches and careful records left behind. Every item seemed to tell a story. The appraiser's excitement grew with each detail he examined. First, he examined the coins. John and Emily watched as he gently brushed away the dust and handled each piece with care. The coins were old, some dating back decades, and many of them rare. The appraiser explained that a few of them were worth far more than their face value, sought after by collectors around the world. Emily's eyes widened as he carefully stacked them into categories of value. Next, he moved on to the bundles of old banknotes. "These are very rare," he said, his voice full of awe. Some of the notes had historical significance. Issued during periods of time when currency was limited and the designs were unique, he carefully flipped through them, writing notes and occasionally murmuring to himself about their worth. The couple could hardly believe what they were hearing. Every word seemed to make their hearts beat faster. Then came the wrapped items. They were delicate, small packages tied with old string. The appraiser unwrapped them slowly, revealing gemstones, jewelry, and small artifacts. Each piece seemed more remarkable than the last. Emily held her breath, unable to speak as he examined a set of sparkling gems. "These are genuine," he said finally, smiling, "and very valuable. Some of these could easily be worth thousands each." John ran his hands through his hair, feeling both disbelief and excitement. What had seemed like an ordinary shed just a few days ago now contained treasures worth a fortune. Hidden away and forgotten for decades, after several hours of careful examination, the appraiser stepped back, his notebook filled with notes and estimates. He looked at John and Emily and said, "I have seen many collections over the years, but this is extraordinary. You are sitting on a treasure that could easily be worth millions." The words hung in the air, almost too incredible to comprehend. Emily clutched John's arm, both of them laughing and shaking their heads. They had imagined finding something interesting or valuable, but nothing on this scale. The shed, which had seemed abandoned and worthless, had transformed into a secret vault of unimaginable wealth. The couple asked questions, eager to understand how this treasure could have gone unnoticed for so long. The appraiser explained that such collections were often carefully hidden by their owners. Some people kept treasures in unlikely places to avoid theft, or simply to ensure that only someone determined enough would find them. This explanation fit perfectly with what they had discovered in the shed: the careful packaging, the hidden lockbox, and even the reinforced floorboards suggested that whoever had hidden these items wanted them to remain a secret. John and Emily felt a thrill of connection to the past. Imagining the person who had taken such care to preserve these treasures, leaving behind a silent story waiting to be uncovered. As the afternoon passed, they discussed what to do next. The appraiser advised them to document everything carefully and consider legal ownership. They needed to ensure the treasure was properly declared and authenticated, and that any historical or rare items were handled according to the law. The couple listened attentively, understanding the importance of taking the right steps. At the same time, they allowed themselves moments to dream about the possibilities the treasure offered. They could pay off debts, invest in their future, and even help others. But the most exciting part was the adventure itself, the thrill of discovery, and the story unfolding before them. By evening, they had carefully packed the items back into the lockbox and secured it in a corner of the shed. Their minds were buzzing with excitement and wonder. They kept returning to the details, imagining how the treasures had arrived there, who had hidden them, and why they had been forgotten for so long. Every small object told a story. Every coin and note connected them to a history they had only glimpsed through the dust-covered items. The shed, which had once seemed ordinary and abandoned, become a portal to the past, full of mystery, value, and intrigue. That night, back at their home, John and Emily found it hard to sleep. They kept talking quietly, sharing thoughts and speculations, playing every moment in the shed and imagining what the next steps might be. The discovery had changed the way they saw everything. The world felt bigger, full of hidden possibilities and secrets waiting to be found. What had started as a simple purchase of cheap, abandoned land had turned into something far beyond their imagination. It was no longer just land or a shed. It was the beginning of a story that would transform their lives in ways they could not yet fully understand. The next day, they returned to the shed with a sense of purpose. They were no longer just curious. They were determined to understand the full story of the treasure, to uncover its origins, and to take the right steps to preserve it. The discovery had become a mission, a thrilling puzzle connecting them to history and mystery. They felt a mix of responsibility and excitement, knowing that what they had found was rare, valuable, and deeply significant. Their lives, once ordinary, now revolved around this extraordinary find. And every thought of the shed brought a rush of anticipation, as if the old building itself was quietly celebrating its rediscovery. After their discovery, John and Emily couldn't stop thinking about the treasure hidden in the shed. The thrill of finding something so valuable was still fresh, but a deeper question started to take over their minds. How did it get there? Who had hidden it, and why had it been left behind for decades? The more they thought about it, the more they realized that the story behind the treasure could be just as fascinating as the treasure itself. They decided to investigate the history of the land. Determined to uncover the mystery that had remained hidden for so long, they started at the local town records office, a small, quiet building filled with dusty files and old ledgers. The clerk, noticing their curiosity, directed them to property ownership records and historical maps. John and Emily pored over the documents, tracing the land back several decades. They discovered that the property had once belonged to a man named Harold Morrison, a recluse who had lived there alone. According to old records, Harold was known in the town for being secretive and wealthy. Few people had visited him, and those who did said he rarely spoke about his possessions or personal life. It seemed strange at first, but the more John and Emily read, the more they began to understand why someone might hide a treasure in a shed on this particular plot of land. As they dug deeper, they found newspaper clippings detailing Harold's sudden disappearance in the 1970s. The stories were brief and mysterious. He had vanished without a trace, leaving behind his home, land, and belongings. Some locals speculated that he had simply moved away, while others whispered about hidden fortunes and secret hoards. The couple was intrigued by the possibility that Harold had deliberately hidden his wealth, perhaps fearing theft or simply wanting to preserve it for the future. Every piece of information added another layer to the mystery, and John and Emily felt as though they were stepping back in time, piecing together a puzzle left untouched for decades, determined to learn more. They visited older residents of the town who might remember Harold. One elderly man recalled seeing him walking along the edges of his property, carrying small crates and carefully placing items in the shed. He was very particular about where everything went, the man said. I always wondered why he went to so much trouble for a small shed. Now I guess I know. His words gave John and Emily chills, as if a connection had been made between past and present. It seemed Harold had meticulously prepared the shed as a secret storage, ensuring that only someone observant and patient would discover what he had hidden. Emily, always curious about small details, noticed that the arrangement of items inside the shed matched the sketches in the old leather-bound notebook they had found. Each crate, each bundle, and even the reinforced section of the floorboards seemed to correspond with Harold's careful notes. It was clear that he had planned everything deliberately. John and Emily realized that the treasure had not just been hidden, it had been preserved, almost like a time capsule. The idea that they were now part of Harold's carefully orchestrated plan added a thrilling sense of purpose to their discovery. They weren't just finders of treasure. They were participants in a story that had been decades in the making. Curiosity drove them back to the shed again and again. They began to examine the surrounding land, looking for hidden compartments, unusual markings, or anything that might give more clues about Harold's intentions. Beneath an old oak tree, they discovered a small hollow that contained faded photographs and letters. The photographs showed Harold with a younger version of himself, sometimes with friends or family, but always near the shed. The letters were brief, cryptic, and carefully written, hinting at the value of the items stored inside. It became clear that Harold had wanted to leave a record for whoever might find his collection. A way to ensure the story of his hidden wealth was not completely lost to time. The more they explored, the more they felt connected to Harold's life. They imagined him as a man who valued his possessions deeply. Someone cautious but thoughtful who wanted to protect his wealth from the outside world. Each discovery, the photographs, the letters, the detailed notebook painted a picture of a man who had lived a solitary life, yet had left behind a trail for the right person to follow. John and Emily were amazed at how much care and attention had gone into hiding the treasure. It wasn't just the value of the items themselves. It was the story, the planning, and the secrecy that made the discovery extraordinary. They also learned that the town had largely forgotten Harold over the years. His house had fallen into disrepair, and many people assumed the property was worthless or abandoned. That was what made their discovery even more remarkable. The shed had remained untouched, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone like John and Emily to notice its secrets. They felt a sense of respect for the man who had hidden the treasure. Instead of thinking of him as a recluse or eccentric, they saw him as clever, careful, and thoughtful. Someone who had created a legacy that would outlast him. As the days passed, John and Emily documented everything they found. They took photographs, made notes, and organized the contents of the shed, all while keeping the treasure secure. Their investigation into Harold's life added depth to the discovery. It was no longer just a random pile of valuable items. It was part of a larger story, a historical puzzle they were piecing together. They could almost feel Harold's presence in the shed, as if he had left a silent invitation for someone curious and determined enough to continue his work by the end of the week. John and Emily had a clearer understanding of the mystery. They realized that Harold had hidden his wealth not out of greed, but out of caution and care. The shed had been designed as a secret vault, and they were the ones fortunate enough to uncover it. The treasure had been waiting for decades, protected from theft, decay, and time itself. It was a story of patience, secrecy, and foresight, and now they were part of it. Every coin, every note, every photograph became more meaningful. Carrying the weight of history and the brilliance of a man who had thought ahead, the discovery transformed the way John and Emily looked at their own lives. They felt a sense of responsibility, not just to the treasure, but to the story behind it. They wanted to honor Harold's careful planning, preserve the historical items, share the story in a way that respected his life and legacy. The excitement of finding valuable items was now intertwined with the satisfaction of uncovering a long-forgotten tale. It was more than money. It was history, mystery, and human ingenuity, all rolled into one incredible adventure. They often returned to the shed, spending hours examining small details, piecing together clues, and imagining Harold's life. Each trip revealed something new, a hidden compartment, a forgotten note, or a detail in the notebook they had missed before. The couple realized that the treasure was not just the physical items they had found, but the story itself. Discovering Harold's careful planning and understanding the history of the property made the adventure richer and far more meaningful. They were no longer just owners of abandoned land. They had become part of a living history, custodians of a remarkable secret. Through their investigation, John and Emily felt a deep connection to the past. They understood the patience, thoughtfulness, and care that went into hiding the treasure, and they respected the legacy left behind. The shed, once ordinary and forgotten, had become a bridge to the past, a link between generations, and a reminder that sometimes even the most overlooked places hold extraordinary secrets. With each discovery, their excitement grew, but so did their appreciation for the story and the man who had hidden it. They realized that finding the treasure was just the beginning. Understanding it, preserving it, and honoring its history was the true adventure. After weeks of careful investigation and discovery, John and Emily's lives had already begun to feel different. The treasure they had found in the shed was no longer just a collection of coins, banknotes, and rare artifacts. It had become a part of their story, a secret they had uncovered and a responsibility they now carried. Every morning they woke up thinking about the possibilities the treasure offered, but also about the careful steps they needed to take to manage it responsibly. The excitement of discovery had been replaced with a mixture of wonder, caution, and a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity they had stumbled upon. They started by contacting legal experts to ensure that the treasure was fully theirs to claim. It was important to them that everything was done by the book, to avoid any potential disputes or misunderstandings. With the appraiser's documentation and photographs of the items, the lawyers confirmed that there were no claims on the property or its contents. It felt surreal to John and Emily to hear those words after all the mystery. All the late nights exploring the shed and all the research into Harold Morrison's life, they were now legally the owners of a treasure worth millions. The reality of it was both thrilling and daunting. They laughed, hugged, and allowed themselves a moment of pure joy, knowing that their lives had just changed in ways they could never have imagined. Once the legal work was done, the couple turned their attention to the practical matters of handling and securing the treasure. They purchased a safe, installed it inside the shed. It's been reinforced the structure to ensure that the valuable items would remain protected. They organized the coins, banknotes, and gemstones, carefully cataloging each item with the help of the appraiser. Every detail mattered: the history, the condition, and the value. What had started as a dusty, forgotten box in a shed had become a carefully preserved collection of wealth and history. John and Emily felt a deep respect for the care Harold Morrison had taken to hide and protect his treasures decades ago. It was almost as if he had planned for them, leaving behind not just the items, but also instructions in his notebook on how they should be preserved. With the treasure secured, John and Emily began to think about the future. The discovery had given them options they had never had before. They could pay off debts, invest in a home, and secure their financial future. But more than that, they felt a sense of responsibility to honor the story behind the treasure. They decided to donate a portion of the items of historical significance to a local museum, ensuring that Harold's story would be shared with the community and preserved for future generations. The decision brought them satisfaction. They were not just owners of a fortune, but custodians of history, helping to share a story that might otherwise have been forgotten as word of their discovery spread through the small town. People were curious, amazed, and often incredulous. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers came to hear the story of the abandoned shed and the hidden fortune. John and Emily were careful to share only parts of the story, keeping the details of the treasure and its location private. Yet, the excitement in the town was palpable. The story became a local legend, a tale that people would tell for years. The couple who had bought cheap, forgotten land and discovered a treasure worth millions hidden in a tiny shed. For John and Emily, it was amusing and humbling to see the fascination. But they knew the true value was not just the money, it was the adventure, the discovery, and the connection to a man from the past who had hidden his life's collection with such care. Life began to change for them in small but meaningful ways. Financial worries that had once loomed large seemed to vanish, replaced by new possibilities. They used some of the money to invest in education, travel, and experiences they had only dreamed of before. They also helped family and friends, ensuring that the treasure's benefits extended beyond themselves. Yet, despite all the newfound wealth, John and Emily remained grounded. They remembered the excitement of the first day they had stepped onto the overgrown land, the thrill of lifting the lockbox, and the feeling of discovering something extraordinary in a seemingly ordinary place. That sense of adventure and humility stayed with them, a reminder of how life can change unexpectedly when curiosity and courage meet opportunity. They also took time to reflect on the mystery of Harold Morrison. The man who had hidden the treasure was no longer just a name in old documents and photographs. He had become a character in their lives, a presence they felt whenever they stepped into the shed. They imagined his careful planning, the precision with which he stored each item, and the foresight he must have had to preserve his collection for decades. John and Emily felt a strange connection to him, as if by discovering the treasure, they had become part of his story. They respected his meticulousness and his desire to protect the items, and they hoped that in preserving and sharing the story, they were honoring his life in the way he might have wanted. In their free time, they began to document the entire journey. They wrote down everything from the moment they first saw the for sale sign, to the dusty crates in the shed, the thrill of opening the lockbox, the meetings with the appraiser, and the history they uncovered about Harold Morrison. Writing the story helped them appreciate the adventure even more, and they realized how rare such experiences were. Most people go through life never stumbling upon a secret hidden in plain sight, never connecting with a story frozen in time. For John and Emily, it had been a combination of curiosity, courage, and luck that led them to the discovery, and they wanted to preserve the memories for themselves and others. The shed, once overgrown and forgotten, became a place of pride for the couple. They cleared the surrounding land, creating a small garden and making the area accessible and inviting. Each visit reminded them of the journey they had taken, the mysteries they had solved, and the lessons they had learned about patience, observation, and respect for history. The treasure itself remained safely stored, but the shed had become a symbol of discovery, its adventure, and the unexpected ways life can change. Every coin, note, and gemstone told a story, but the shed, the quiet, unassuming structure, told the story of their own journey and the connection between past and present. Over time, John and Emily found that the discovery had changed more than just their finances. It had deepened their bond, strengthened their teamwork, and given them a sense of purpose beyond everyday routines. They learned to appreciate small moments, to explore curiosity without fear, and to respect the mysteries hidden in ordinary places. The adventure had taught them that life is full of surprises, and sometimes the most extraordinary experiences come from places you least expect. It had been a lesson in patience, in observation, and in embracing the unknown. Years later, people still remembered the story. The couple became local legends, the owners of the abandoned land with a shed that had held millions for decades. John and Emily never grew tired of retelling the story, though they kept the exact details of the treasure private. Each time they did, they could feel the thrill all over again, the excitement, the fear, the curiosity, and finally, the joy of discovery. And though their lives had changed in countless ways, they never forgot the first day they walked onto that overgrown land, the creaking shed, and the moment when the lockbox revealed a secret that had waited for decades. Through it all, John and Emily understood that the true value of the treasure was not only in the money or precious items, but in the journey itself. It was the thrill of discovery, the unraveling of history, the connection to a lifelong past that made the adventure priceless. The abandoned shed, the forgotten land, and the careful planning of Harold Morrison had given them an extraordinary story. A fortune beyond money and a lifetime of memories. It was an adventure that began with curiosity, grew with patience, and ended with gratitude, shaping their lives in ways they would never forget.